So I'm a little bit of a rambly mood today. I thought I would digress and talk about, I guess, some speculative imagination pumps for people who still have something like religious thought or spiritual sentiment and these kinds of things. We just got done with Easter and heard, you know, all kinds of talk about Jesus and the resurrection and this kind of stuff. And I mean, it's interesting. Part of me thinks this is obviously a myth. This is a story about a person who brought a revolution in the way that people think, and I'm all for love and compassion and grand forgiveness. Another part of me thinks that, there are people who have just taken this myth way too literally, and they believe in super fantastical, and in that way they're ignoring their duties. Dewey has a great line where he says the best is the enemy of the better. Yeah, I mean, when we can imagine some super fantastical cure all by way of a magic wand, it alleviates people's burdens of trying to make incremental changes for the betterment of society. But I thought it might be fun to, instead of doing that, because there's a doomsday cult that's here in Grand Rapids that's going to get ready for the rapture here on May 21st. Evidently, the rapture is coming and the end of the world is in October or something like this, but it's all going to begin in May. So I thought I would go down and maybe juggle. And then as I thought more about it, I was thinking, what we need is more kind of creative, imaginative speculation on our connection to things. And so what I thought I'd do here quickly is try to spin off a couple of different stories that are hopefully useful or interesting, or we'll just work with people's ideas to help them think about possibilities and things like this. I think one would be, I think it would be really interesting for people to think about the dog-human relationship and how dogs have potentially, maybe they were the mediating relationship for people's understanding of the gods. I think we know that not only were dogs absolutely crucial for the domestication of cattle, and they played an incredible role in helping humans become human. I mean, in some way, humans would not have become human without their uh, the very complex relationship that they have to other animals, and dogs in particular. But the dog relationship is interesting because I think, dogs, they bark and they make sounds, but there is a sense in which, we say the dog doesn't talk. The dog, it can't tell you how it's feeling. You can't really give it either or options. You say to the dog, would you rather have a treat or would you rather go outside? The dog, we don't have discourse and deliberation, and we can't reason with the dog. I think this is partly why the ancient Greeks, when they used the word logos and said, we're the talking animal, they tried to say, well, you can't reason with the dog. And by that, again, logos meant reason, talk, discourse, dialogue. I mean, you can't really have that. And yet, we have incredibly sophisticated relationships with our dogs. We can love our dogs. We can feel them care about us if we're sick. There's so many relationships that our dogs train us in, when they're hungry, when they need to go out. And we do have this sort of relationship to them that's, I guess, in some way one of care. It's reciprocal care, but it's also a hierarchical care. Whereas, dogs are pack animals, especially certain breeds, or even more so, it really comes out of them. And they have this hierarchical understanding and this notion of submission to a higher power. And, it's interesting to think of, I know a lot of people have done, the dog God comparison, that God is dog spelled backwards. And there's black masses where, Satan is the dog, and Satan is, again, it's sort of metaphorically done where the mass is done backward, and the dog has this kind of odd reference. But if you think about it another way, it could be that dogs were a kind of mediating relationship that dialectically allowed people to imagine a comparative being higher to them as they saw themselves related to dogs. So they took their relationship to dogs, how they felt about them, their care, their feeling for an animal that has kind of limited, seems comparatively limited in its awareness and its capacity to love and all these kinds of other things. And then we, again, sort of imaginatively took that and dialectically threw it above ourselves and went, well, just as we care for these animals, there must be something comparatively, superior to us, something to which we defer, where we feel ourselves in a kind of submission to a hierarchically superior, it could be, it had the angels and the saints and all these kinds of different things. But I think just in general, if you think of the human animal relationship as one that was a kind of backdrop of intelligibility for the projection of comparatively superior beings, I think there probably is something there. That would be part of it. I think another part would be, and this came from a conversation I had with somebody about, it was all kinds of things. We were talking about polytheism and monotheism and animism and deism and all the different kinds of forms of religious beliefs. And we were laughing. Some of it was sort of speculative, kind of, what steam from the half bakery kind of stuff. And but the thought that was funny was trying to think about the possibility of like an intergalactic polytheism. Now, again, I don't want this to be taken too seriously. This is supposed to be funny and in jest. I don't really believe this, but I think there's something that again helps the imagination to try to think about it. It's that if we imagine, just for argument's sake, that there is a kind of impending singularity in Ray Kurzweil's sense that there soon will be, I don't know, a cure for death and technologies of such sophistication of, nanobot and biotech and neuroscience. It's all going to conspire together to make some sort of super fantastical, I guess, a machine that's biologically based, that is superior to the human. Now, it could be somewhat similar to what we were talking about there with, rather than us seeing ourselves as, again, the care providers for other animals and then projecting some further care provider for us by way of, I guess, an automated a cyborg or something like this. But I think if we imagine that the entire cosmos is a kind of seedbed, and that Earth itself was a little seedling in its infancy, and it grew all the way, or let's call it a pregnancy, even better. If you imagine that the Earth is a kind of single organism that was pregnant, that slowly was paving the way, and like if you imagine each person as like a neuron within an interconnected super brain that's emerging and growing together and eventually will form one kind of body that will be, I guess, it will be the body that leaves the Earth and becomes a kind of intergalactic player. Like Earth itself is a god that we're in the process of giving birth to, and the singularity will be when the technological sophistication is ripe for the emergence of this super intelligent organism that will go relate to others similar to it on different planets. If you try to imagine again a kind of intergalactic polytheism where there are planets throughout the cosmos that are slowly evolving toward, again, sort of massive integration of information to such a degree that whole new playing fields of interactions for beings that far surpass us, that make us look the equivalent of a single cell organism on this planet. I mean, it's hard to think of the right scale and scope of analysis of what would go on here. And I hope that I do not believe that this is the case. I think it's a funny imagination pump to try to deal with how big space is, how vast time is, to really try to put it into perspective. It is fun, I think, in some way, to try to imagine, you know, again, an intergalactic polytheism where the Earth itself is in the process of giving birth to something that will live, arguably, for millions of years and have some kind of status that we would only be able to recognize as something like, um, I don't know if we would call it divine, but it wouldn't be the kind of nature that we're familiar with. It would be something super, and again, I don't mean beyond the laws of physics, things like this, so much as beyond all what we have come to know of life. That is, imagine a life form that is without any DNA, but it's been artificially created. And it's a form that, in its integrity, will surpass anything that we know that has been through DNA. It does, again, it gets kind of interesting to try to think about the scale and scope of possible relations in this cosmos. I guess a different way to say it is I don't think the end of the world is coming. I think some people have declared a premature death sentence to us all. At any rate, those are some thoughts for the day. Hope everyone is well. Okay, bye bye.